I am Patricia Trutescu, and I am here interviewing Avi Wisnia, singer-songwriter, musician, and thank you for joining us today. Music Historian is a WordPress blog, and I encourage you to go and read it. And if you are also on WordPress, you can follow my blog there. And I also want to take the time to let audiences know that this is the 10-year anniversary in which I interviewed Avi Wisnia. I interviewed him 10 years ago, right after he released his second album, Something New. And now I am back interviewing him for the release of his long-awaited third album, Catching Leaves. Welcome, Avi Wisnia.
Thank you so much, Patricia. It's great to see you and happy anniversary or 10-year anniversary.
Happy anniversary. I should be saying welcome back.
It's flown by. It's really it's wild, how much time has passed. But yeah, it's great to be back talking with you again, and especially to have some new music to talk about.
Yes, I'm so excited. I was so excited when I learned that your album was finally releasing, and I know you were doing a lot of work over the years to really help get to the release of that album, and so much has happened. And I just think this is a perfect time to really just talk about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to discuss it.
Great. Well, once again, welcome back. And I'm going to go into the first question, Avi. Um, when I heard the opening track to Catching Leaves, which is Catching Leaves, it creates space for harmonies in the string and time for the listeners to hear some of the jazz chords, which is also very prominent in your choice of incorporating some bossa nova influence in some of your songs too. And there's also a suspense that is created by the prolonged silences and the unresolved chord at the end of this opening track. And this is a very different tone than what the opening track, which was the prelude in Something New, had set up. The opening of Something New felt like we were definitely in for something a little more jazzy and alternative, and the opening for Catching Leaves feels a little more neoclassical and romantic. And I just wanted to know from you, what, in your opinion, what has changed compositionally in these two albums?
Well, I think, starting the album off with the title track, with Catching Leaves, I felt was kind of a bold choice that I wanted to lean into. It's not necessarily like, a big pop single that you lead off an album with. It's a little more reflective, a little more contemplative. It's definitely a much more mellow tone, but it sets up a mood and it sets up a vibe. And I just felt like, of all the songs on the album, this one encompasses the album the most. And like you mentioned, the tension and the silences and the space really kind of speaks to the kind of space I was living in mentally at the time, trying to be present and trying to create a little more room for the listener to to be invited into my world and to come and sit with me and try and be present. And I think I played a lot more with those kind of silences and tensions and space in this album, and being okay with, letting there be some space and letting there be silence, and that silence is a part of the music itself.
I also researched a few interviews that you did with other outlets, one of them being The Strange Brew.
Yeah.
And I know in that article you talked about the grief that you experienced losing your brother, and that helped inspire some of the overarching themes of this album. And I wonder whether the song Catching Leaves helps to introduce the theme. I know you said that it gave listeners that space, and I wanted to know if that is what you also inspired you to create that space, and if there were other songs that also helped to speak to this theme of being with the silence and probably being like reflective and contemplative, even on feelings, complicated feelings such as grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, the process of making this album was a process of me trying to deal with the grief of losing my brother, who I was really close with and made music with all the time. He was my older brother, but we weren't that far apart in age. And so we grew up making music together. And so for me, just the whole concept of making music, I associate with him and has a lot of memories with him. And so when I lost him, when he passed away, I felt kind of lost for a while. And I think for a lot of us, when we experience grief, we feel kind of lost. We don't know how to move forward, and we need to find our new way uh, in the world with these new feelings and trying to find our footing again. And in a way, that's a lot of what the song Catching Leaves is about. It's about feeling like you don't have your footing, like you are just a leaf blowing in the wind and without really a direction, just kind of this beautiful chaos. Um, but but the idea in that, the beauty in that, is that there is to recognize the beauty in the chaos, and that sometimes just sitting in that moment can help us um, figure out what we need to do to move forward. And grief is not a linear process. It's not like things get better and they just keep getting better, or some days are good and some days are bad, and some days are up, some days are good. Sometimes you feel like you can move forward, some days you regress back. um, but there is, I think, a lot of times a push in our society to just like get over it, just keep moving. And when really sometimes we just need to sit still and to recognize where we are before we can find our footing again. And that's a lot of what the song is about, and that's also kind of the a through line of the whole album.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Know that so much has changed for you over the last 10 years. You've learned also another major part of your life, I feel, is you've learned more about your grandfather, the late David Wisnia. I understand he was a cantor. He was also a Holocaust survivor. You traveled to Poland together and you performed there. And I wanted to know, and I know you traveled to Poland back in 2015, and
Mhm.
then you traveled again 2 years ago, and
Yeah.
you performed during both trips, correct?
Yes. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit more about the experience of performing with your grandfather when he was still alive, and what impact that had on you as a performer and an artist.
Yeah, being with my grandfather and performing with him was just an incredible experience. And since I became a professional musician myself right out of college, when I started making music and I started going on the road, it was something that I loved to do, and traveling and performing. I never thought I would be ending up going on the road with my 90-year-old grandfather. Um, but he was a singer ever since I was a little kid. He was a professional singer. He was been trained in really kind of old world operatic and liturgical traditions. For really in the Jewish traditions of the synagogue. Um, so our music is a little different, and our influences are a little different. But as I got older, he invited me to perform with him, and we started performing together. And with his story of surviving the Holocaust, um, and actually singing is part of his story of survival, of how he survived. And so music really did save his life. And music is also what eventually helped him later in life to tell his story, his very painful and horrible story and tragic story, um, but one that he was finally able to share through music. And by being able to make music with him, I felt like I was able to help him share that. And he invited me to go back to him with Poland to Poland when we performed for this big ceremony, a Holocaust remembrance ceremony. And it was so profound to be there in this place where these horrible things happened to him, and yet to see him uh, be able to go back there and sing with strength as he did when he was like a little boy, but now to sing as a survivor and to know that his music was carried on and that I was helping him carry on his music and he was passing it on to me. Um, and in a lot of ways, traveling with my grandfather helped me understand and find ways to move forward with my own grief from the loss of my brother, because I know that my grandfather lost his entire family in the Holocaust. And he was able to teach me about what it means to be resilient and what it means to move forward in the face of tragedy, that you can't always move on from things that happen, but you can still find ways to move forward. And the common bond between us, the way that we found ways to move forward, was through music.
That's very symbolic, and I mean also just very inspirational too, because I know that you both grew up in different environments, different cultures, and different times too.
Yeah, different, totally different worlds. And yet it was very funny because we would, we listened to very different music together, and we would watch different things on TV. So, traveling with him was very funny. But we found things in common, like we both loved coffee and needed coffee often, and we both loved staying up late and sleeping in late. So
Hmm.
there were a lot of a lot of ways that we worked very well together on the road, and we were also able to teach each other a lot of things. He was able to teach me his um, very emotional, operatic style of music that really just came from his gut. Like he didn't sing with a time signature. You just had to follow him wherever he went, and um, that was such an incredible experience for me to kind of follow his lead. And yet I got to teach him things about kind of pop music and more modern music, and got him to sing some of those songs with me. So there was a really wonderful exchange that we were able to have, even though, as you said, we came from very different worlds.
Well, fantastic. And I was also able to look on your website and look back at My Polish Wisnia, where you documented both of your trip to Poland back from 2015. And I was just like, it was just like a nice reminder of that trip. It seems like so long ago. 2015 was a different world from 2020,
Oh
obviously.
yeah, yeah, eras ago, yeah.
And in retrospect, I just wonder, like, are there any new lessons that you continue to learn from that trip?
Yeah, I learned a lot being on that trip. Um, and as you said, I continue every time I think about our journey together and our experiences together. And now, even when I tell his story and try and keep his story of survival alive, um, I'm reminded of a lot of things. One is also the importance of storytelling, how powerful telling our stories can be, how much they can help us connect to one another and empathize with one another, to recognize what somebody else has gone through and what they've been through, um, to know our family's history and how important that is, where we come from and what our family's history is, and what we carry forward with us. Um, and also how important music is, that music really connects us all, that music is in, my grandfather sang in so many languages,
Hmm.
and even when audiences did not know what he was singing, if they couldn't understand the particular language, they could understand the emotion. And it just drove home for me how much music is a unifier and music is a universal language, um, and how it really is a force to connect people. And And that's what I feel like the best thing I can do carrying his story forward is to remind us all that we are all connected. We're all responsible for each other. Um, and we can do that through music.
That is an amazing lesson. I mean, we are all responsible for each other in, you know, some respect. And if music can help remind us of that, that's just wonderful. And um, out of curiosity, this is like an ad lib question, but what languages grandfather sing in?
Wow. So raised in Poland, so he definitely spoke Polish, um, Yiddish, Hebrew, obviously being raised in the synagogue, and then he also learned German and French and Italian.
Mm.
Um, so that's about six. Oh, and English, if I didn't say the English as well. So he was a young kind of, uh, he would say he was a prodigy, and he absolutely was a prodigy. He was a young singing star. So being a singer, he had to sing in all of these languages, but he was able to speak them also. And just up until, he lived until he was 94 and he was still speaking all of these languages. He could just pull them out of the top of his head and, um, was really had a master of language that was really impressive.
And I bet that comes in handy when you're traveling through Europe because, like, in Europe, I kind of noticed that I've been to Europe a few times myself, and I could, like, I hear, you know, people coming from everywhere.
Hmm.
And I just think that's such a great skill to have to communicate in various languages.
Oh, yes, for sure. And it also made us a lot of friends because wherever we went, my grandfather would talk to everybody. And if you told him what country you were from, and he would start speaking in your language, and then all of a sudden, everybody became our friends. So everywhere we went, every train, every plane ride, every restaurant, he made friends with wherever he went. And with everything that he went through, he was such a joyous, happy guy. And that was always so remarkable to me, and I kind of aspire to be like that and to have that outlook on life.
Well, that's fabulous. And I want to know, what are you doing to continue his legacy going forward? Are there any upcoming projects with his music involved?
Absolutely. So I am continuing to tell his story, to do programs at schools and universities and museums, and give presentations about his music and his story. He has a memoir that was published called One Voice, Two Lives that chronicles his story. And there's actually a lot of videos that we tried to make towards the end of his life because there wasn't a lot of recordings of him singing and not a lot of video. So we actually did a concert together, and we have some video footage that we're going to be putting out of us performing together. Um, so that's a project I'm working on to keep his memory alive and his music alive. And also, there's a documentary about his life coming out that will be out very soon. And in fact, we had a documentary crew come with us on our last trip to Poland, and so they were able um, to be with us and to film that really special time. And so that will be coming out soon as well.
That's wonderful. I mean, has he had interview opportunities in in that documentary footage?
Yes, yes. There's him telling his story, and there's us interacting as a family, and there's us performing music. So kind of all of these facets of his life that I'm so grateful that we had the chance to do while he was alive and able to tell his story in his own voice.
Mm-hmm. Got it, got it. Well, I really look forward to seeing that documentary. Let me know when it's released and where we can view it. I'd be happy to share it on my social media as well.
Absolutely, for sure. As you mentioned, a part of my website is my blog called My Polish Wisnia, which documents our journey together, and so that's where I'll keep updates about projects having to do with my grandfather and his music, and that's all on my website, aviwisnia.com.
Awesome, thank you. Um, and I've also followed your performances throughout the years, and you've also have this energy. And I can, just listening to you talk about your grandfather, I think one of the things that you both share in common is you're able to just like engage a room with you and your music and help to create a small community of that. And having followed you in your performances throughout the years, I know you have sung Simple Words, Heat Lightning, Come Home To. You have spoken about Come Home To is the story based on one of your friends who started a new chapter in their life, becoming a parent. And then Heat Lightning has an interesting story too, where you learned what heat lightning was. It wasn't actually heat lightning, but it was a storm out in the distance, a thunderstorm where it wasn't in your area, but in another area, and you were able
Right.
to see it.
Right, that heat lightning is actually a phenomenon that doesn't really exist. It's just a storm off in the distance. Yeah.
Mhm. And I mean, those were crowd pleasers. You've had people singing along to Heat Lightning, and I've even invited some friends over to these performances, and they had a great time doing that too.
Yeah.
What have listeners' feedback been on the songs that you've played for them, even before they went on Catching Leaves?
I think part of making an album for me is getting a chance to play a lot of these songs live and to try them out, kind of test them out in front of an audience and see what parts hit and what parts feel good and what part, it helps me really work on the songwriting part of it to hear how an audience reacts. But one of my favorite things is to create that interaction, that live moment for an audience. So anytime there's a way for us to sing along or audience participation or whether that's adding percussion or harmony or even kazoos, like sometimes I'll hand out kazoos, people will kazoo along with me. But that audience participation is what makes it so fun and what makes every show unique, which is the best part of performing live, that every live performance is its own special universe that can never be replicated again because it's a magic combination of the room that you're in and the people that are there and the mood that night and the sound equipment and um, so that has really helped me hone a lot of the songs that were on this album and to find out which ones to include, and also to try and keep some of that energy. Obviously, there are ways that you want to do it differently in a studio, and we were able to do that with string quartet, for instance, or a horn trio, which I don't always have on the road with me. Um, but I do hope that there are parts of these songs still that if you're listening at home, you can still sing along to them. Find ways to interact with them and engage with them.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up that fact about how each space is different. Um, because when I first heard you perform, I first heard you perform at CMJ back in 2011.
Hmm.
And when I interviewed you, it was at the back of the Beatles Complete on ukulele.
Yes, right.
That was at Brooklyn Bowl, and I remember the energy in the crowd that night, and even like backstage, where you were hanging out with other musicians. That's where um, I interviewed you. I remember the kazoo that you played, um,
Yes.
with that song that you covered, and as you know, like now we come to this period where it is COVID, and the world, like I said, has become a very different place. And in March 2020, because the city shut down due to the pandemic, during this time, I know you were still working on your album Catching Leaves, but musicians were now moving their performance spaces online
Yeah.
and performing on, for example, Facebook Live, or just finding other live mediums, virtual mediums to perform their work. And I wanted to get a sense from your perspective, like what challenges presented themselves as you were getting ready to release Catching Leaves and then this major event just happened.
Yeah, the pandemic turned everything upside down for everybody, right? And it stopped everything. All the momentum, all the gigs I had were completely wiped out, um, and it also really cut off our ability to connect with one another, especially for live performers. That is what we do. We get in a room with people and we breathe the same air. And that was the most dangerous thing we could do at the moment. Um, so it was really really challenging. Luckily, thankfully, we do have the tools, um, like Zoom and Facebook Live and these different ways of, and even social media, being able to record and do projects over social media to be able to continue to find ways to connect and to put music out there. Um, and for me, the silver lining of the pandemic in terms of the recording project was that it allowed me the space to kind of clear out distractions from the hustle of everyday life and be like, okay, I'm going to focus now and really get, finish the album that had been many years in the making. We had recorded it in the studio, but we still needed to do the mixing and put the artwork together. And that gave me the space to focus on it and to figure out how I was going to put it out, which was, largely going to be online, and that any tours were going to have to at least wait for a little bit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Interviewing another artist back in May of 2020, they were expecting that the fall of 2021 would be the time where musicians could go back to performing live
Yeah.
for audiences. And in a sense, it was because your first performance was actually in 2021, right after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, in the fall, I knew because this album feels so much like autumn and just feels like fall. So I had set my release date for the fall. And yeah, we all assumed that things were going to be looking better for fall of 2021, and for a little bit they were. Um, I feel lucky that I was able to do an album release show in person, kind of just in a little window of time where things felt like, okay, we could go out if you're vaccinated and you're wearing a mask, and we could gather. And we went to this wonderful venue here in Philly called the City Winery, um, and we were able to do an album release show. And I had hoped to do more in different cities, but I knew that what would really felt special to me was to do it in my hometown of Philadelphia. And so to be able to do, even just one big album release show, to have one night where people felt comfortable getting together, was so amazing. And again, that just the energy in the room, I think because people hadn't been together in a room experiencing live music for so long, you could just feel this release. And I mean, I felt it for myself. I had missed being on stage with the band, with an audience, and it just felt great. And also to be able to play these new songs um, was just a really wonderful moment. So I'm I'm glad, I'm very grateful we at least had that moment. And hopefully, in the coming year of 2022 and beyond, there will be many more of those to come.
I certainly hope so too. I mean, I agree with you. Nothing beats a live performance. The virtual connections are really, really good alternatives to keeping music alive, but I feel like music is best made when it's shared. I definitely
Yes.
do. And
Yeah, 100%. Nothing can ever replace the live music experience, no matter how much technology evolves, right? It will never replace the live music experience.
yeah, and I mean just like the ability to, because you can actually, I know you can bring people together on technology, but you actually don't see it as much as you do like in person. It's a different experience.
Yeah, and you don't feel it, you can't really feel that energy through the screen. It just is not the same.
A- Agreed, agreed. And I'm also curious to know a little bit more about the cover songs that you chose for your album. There's Harvest Moon that you cover, which is originally by Neil Young, How to Fight Loneliness by Wilco, and D&D, which has had so many cover songs over the years. I'm curious to know, why did you choose to include these songs on Catching Leaves?
I always like to include a few cover songs on my albums. It's something I love to do is to interpret and reinterpret other people's music. And something I never want to do is just play a song kind of the way it's been presented by another artist, because that artist has already done it and perfected it in their own way. So I always look for covers that I can bring something new to, but that have touched me in a way and affected me in a way that makes me feel like I can put my own spin on it. And so even though a song like Harvest Moon, for instance, is very famous and has been done many times, there's a kind of when I listen to it, there's a kind of melancholy that I wanted to bring out that I thought would really fit in with this album. And the same thing with How to Fight Loneliness. Both of these songs really kind of spoke to, I think, where I was at the time in the process of making this album and choosing which songs I wanted to do. I thought they really fit, and also I could do something kind of new and unique with them. And then Ginji, which is a classic bossa nova tune. Um, I love Brazilian music and I love bossa nova, and I wanted to do something really really different, but also keep a little bit of a nod to my love of Brazilian music and put that on the album as well. And we had also a lot of fun just interpreting these songs in the studio, so it helped kind of shake things up, and I'm really glad we added those songs, a little bit of different flavor.
Hmm. Excellent. And I wanted to go back to what you were talking about when you said that it was special when you had the album release party in Philadelphia, because that was another major change over the last 10 years is you moved from NYC, where you lived, I think, for like a decade.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you moved back to Philly, where your family is from originally. And I wanted to know whether the different settings had influenced the music in any way.
Certainly moving back to Philadelphia, um, it was a big shift in this area where I was from as a kid, but never really got to know as an adult. And when I moved back here um, to Philadelphia, I found there's a wonderful music scene. Of course, there's an incredible music scene in New York, but there's a feeling of community that's really here, that kind of fosters that camaraderie. Um, and in fact, when I moved back, I helped organize with a friend of mine the Philly Songwriter Circle, which is a workshop that meets monthly to workshop songs with songwriters. And it grew out of a tiny meeting in my living room to now a group that has over 500 members, and we still meet monthly now virtually. But it's a wonderful group of people that actually helped me workshop a lot of these songs that are on the album. Um, and just walking around Philadelphia really colored a lot of the songs on the album. For instance, the cover art of the album is itself a mural in of a park, or a mural on the side of a park where I would go and write a lot of these songs near my apartment in South Philly. And I was really inspired by this art. It's a beautiful mural by David Gwynn, and it's actually called Autumn Revisited. And so there was another tie-in of autumn and that feeling of change and transition, and even those colors, the colors on the mural helped color the sounds of the songs. And so I feel like, quite literally, Philly helped color the music of this album.
Great, excellent. And 10 years ago, I interviewed you about your album Something New, which you recorded in New York City, and now here we are again. And not only do I notice now that you just explained to me how the change in setting has had an important influence on Catching Leaves, but I also notice like a change and a growth in your skills as a songwriter too. and you bring back some of the elements that listeners have really come to enjoy on something new, such as the bossa nova and the elements of hints of soft rock. Yet you also took new and unexpected artistic risks with Catching Leaves. And were there any new musical influences that helped to also color in the songs for these records, for this record?
Yeah, well, there were, some 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 old influences that are always with me. I think of Chet Baker, trumpet player, and Vince Guaraldi, jazz piano player. Those influences, those sounds are always with me. Ben Folds for sure. And I think there was also a shift into leaning even more into Americana, thinking about Alison Krauss and Brandy Carlisle, um, even a wonderful artist, The Tallest Man on Earth. So there's a more of a shift into Americana, and I think I played around even more with genre in this album, in that each song was kind of allowed to inhabit its own genre, whatever that wanted to be. Um, and that I was okay with kind of, leaning in one way or another. And also, as I said before, kind of also leaving room for space and letting the music breathe and letting the music just be, right? Trying to let the songs lead me where they wanted to go.
Got it. What are, if you could sum up three most important lessons you've learned from recording Catching Leaves, what would they be?
I think, well, one is to slow down. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to take your time. Um, 10 years is a long time, especially in the music industry, especially now, even with social media and people's attention spans. So there is this pressure to constantly go and keep churning out content, but I think it is also okay to take your time with making art, um, and to let the music come when it's ready. Um, and also to lean into to lean into silence and kind of follow the songs. I feel a little more, certainly on this album, I feel more confident in my voice, and I think that's a lifelong journey for any artist, right? We feel like we're constantly growing into ourselves, and sometimes in different directions and changing and evolving. But um, I definitely, felt more confident going into the studio and thinking about what I wanted and what I wanted these songs to sound like, and also being okay when I didn't know what I wanted the sounds to be or where it was going, and to also be okay with that and let the process reveal itself, right? To be in the moment and to just enjoy making music, and you see what feels right in the moment. So it's that balance. And that's ultimately, this whole project has been finding the balance. Where's the balance?
What do you like? What advice do you have for musicians who, may be going through what you're going through right now? They are professionals and they have another album coming out. It's not their first release. And they're trying to really get it out now, like of all times, like these unpredictable moments that we are all experiencing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important, again, take your time, make sure you're happy with the product that you're doing. And, you know, and also there's no need, to wait. Even though I waited a long time, I put it out when I was ready. When it's ready, put it out there, and the audience that is waiting to hear it will be there. You have to do a lot to push it out there. I mean, there's a lot of noise and a lot of music to sift through, but people will find it if you keep putting it out there. And ultimately, find the thing that excites you and do that and follow that and keep doing that, and don't let anybody sway you from it. Because if you're excited about it, other people will be excited about it.
All right, duly noted. Um, those are all the questions I have for you, and I wanted to know, is there anything that you would like to share regarding your new album that I did not address through the questions.
No, thank you. It was so great being able to have a back and forth with you again to talk about the new album, and I can't wait for more people to hear it. Like I'm so excited that the music is finally out in the world after so many years of working on it, by myself and with the musicians in the studio, and it just feels really good to have it out in the world. And I'm excited for what's going to come next, and I hope everybody falls in love with the music.
I want to thank you for your time and not only sharing your music, but sharing the story behind your music as well. You're a music historian. Everyone, the album Catching Leaves is now out. You can actually go and find it on aviwisnia.com. There's a link below here, and it's also available on music streaming services everywhere. And thank you, Avi Wisnia, for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Oh, such a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Great to talk to you again.
Great to talk to you too.